Mr. President, I'm here today to talk about climate change, about our climate crisis. Climate change is an existential threat to our country and the planet. We know this because the world's leading scientists, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, just made that very warning last year. The UN report told us that we have a very limited time until we are past the point of no return, and the most catastrophic impacts of climate change are irreversible. And our own federal scientists across 13 agencies also just warned in the National Climate Assessment that the impacts of climate change are not in the future, but are happening in our communities right now. Here is what all 13 federal agencies said. It said, our efforts do not yet approach the scale to avoid substantial damages to the economy, environment, and human health. These are earth-shattering reports about the state of our Earth. These are the doomsday reports about what happens if we do not take bold action. The consequences of climate change will be dire. A tenfold increase in ice-free summers in the Arctic, 99% loss of coral reefs, a doubling of species loss around the world. In the Northeast, in worst-case scenarios, by the end of the century, both the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Logan Airport will be underwater. And the climate emissions are not slowing down. In 2018, greenhouse gas emissions in the United States increased 2.8%. We have a denier-in-chief in the White House. And this week, Republicans in the Senate are poised to confirm a coal lobbyist to be the head of the Environmental Protection Agency. It's unbelievable that we will confirm a coal lobbyist to be the head of our environment in our country. And Andrew Wheeler's denial of the climate crisis should be, in and of itself, disqualifying. His record as a coal lobbyist should be disqualifying. We should come together and reject Andrew Wheeler as the next head of the Environmental Protection Agency. The impact of climate change on ordinary families, on their health, on our nation, on our security, on our future is too urgent. The United Nations tells us that climate change is an existential threat to the planet. It is the national security, health, economic, and moral issue of our time, of all time. We have a responsibility to act. We must be bold. We must be ambitious. And that is why I have introduced the Green New Deal resolution, because it lays out a serious, bold, aspirational set of goals that meet the scale of the threat. It is a set of principles and not prescriptions, but it challenges this country to find the solutions to this problem. Now, the Green New Deal is a climate plan about net zero emissions. The Republican climate plan is in zero existence. They don't have a climate plan. Republicans don't like the Green New Deal because they don't like a functional government. Republicans don't like the Green New Deal because they don't like climate science. Republicans don't like the Green New Deal because their allies, the oil companies, the coal companies, the corporate polluters, don't like wind power or solar power or all-electric vehicles and millions of blue-collar jobs that they can create. We can save all of creation by engaging in massive blue-collar job creation in this country. Republicans don't like the Green New Deal because clean energy is a direct threat to the interests and bottom line of big oil and big coal. The Green New Deal isn't a socialist manifesto. It isn't pie in the sky. It isn't a takeover. It isn't any of the misinformation and distortions that Republicans and their fossil fuel allies have called it. And the Green New Deal isn't, as the Republican leader has called it this morning, the far-left Santa Claus wish list dressed up to look like serious policy. Because if it were, and Republicans in this chamber wouldn't care enough about it to spend their entire morning remarks on it, then the majority leader wouldn't be threatening to bring it to the floor without any hearings, without any expert testimony, without any amendments, without any science. Let's have the debate. Let's have the hearings. Let's bring in all the experts. Let's let the UN testify. Let's let our own scientists at every one of the federal agencies in America testify. Let's bring in all of the corporate endeavors right now in wind and solar, in all electric vehicles, and storage batteries in our society. Bring them in. Let's hear the story. But instead, what we have is just an attempt to short-circuit the debate. They may not believe climate change is an existential threat to humankind, but they're smart enough to know that the bold goals of the Green New Deal are an existential threat to the Koch brothers and all of their other corporate polluter and fossil fuel allies. But let me just read some of what is in the Green New Deal that Republicans are opposed to. Securing for all people of the United States for generations to come clean air and water, climate and community resiliency, healthy food, access to nature, a sustainable environment. Are Republicans opposed to access to nature? Because that is in the resolution. Are Republicans opposed to clean air and water? Because that is in the resolution too. But do you know what's not in the resolution? Ending airline traffic. Do you know what's not in the resolution? No more cows. Do you know what's not in the resolution? A prohibition on nuclear energy or carbon capture and sequestration. The Green New Deal resolution is bold, it's aspirational in its principles, but it's not prescriptive in its policies. So let's look at some of what actually is in this resolution to create millions of good, high-wage jobs. I guess Republicans don't believe in that. To invest in the infrastructure and industry of the United States to sustainably meet the challenge of the 21st century. I guess Republicans don't believe in that. Guaranteeing universal access to clean water, supporting family farming, cleaning up existing hazardous waste and abandoned sites, ensuring economic development and sustainability on those sites. I guess Republicans don't believe in those either. Those are all part of the Green New Deal and climate solutions. We already know that big oil and King Coal and other fossil fuel companies don't want to compete with clean energy because that is a direct threat to their business plan. And clean energy makes the air we breathe cleaner. It saves consumers money. It makes us safer, and it creates jobs. In his remarks, the Republican leader called the Green New Deal, quote, foolish and dangerous. Well, with all due respect to the leader and my Republican colleagues, the only foolish and dangerous thing about the Green New Deal is to ignore the $400 billion in damage to our country over the last 2 years from supercharged storms, wildfires all over California, all over the West, because to ignore the tens of trillions of dollars in damages we will see from climate change in the United States by 2100 is something that ultimately, from my perspective, is foolish and dangerous. An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. Ignoring what is happening, ignoring the warnings from all of the top scientists in the world and the United States, and continuing on the same pathway, that is foolish. That is dangerous. And that's going to cost us tens of trillions of dollars in damage that would have been otherwise avoided if we unleashed a technology revolution in our country that would create millions of new jobs. It's also dangerous to send our men and women in the military overseas to protect tankers of oil coming from the Middle East to the United States. We're still bringing in oil from Saudi Arabia. We're still bringing in oil from other countries in the Middle East. What if we could dramatically increase the fuel economy of the vehicles which we drive? What if we could accelerate the pace towards all-electric vehicles? Wouldn't it be great if we could say that the day arrived where we never have to see another tanker of oil from the Middle East coming into our country? Would that not make us safer? Would that not give us better control over our own foreign policy and where we send young men and women in uniform? I think it would. I think it would be foolish and dangerous not to take that pathway. The superstorms, the wildfires, rising seas, other extreme weather events, the impacts of climate change if we do not act boldly to stop it. That isn't just dangerous, it is an existential threat. That is what the world's scientists have called it. The Green New Deal is dangerous for the status quo of doing nothing on climate change. It is dangerous for the Koch brothers and those who are used to killing off every climate debate before it gets a chance to start. It is dangerous for those who want us to limp into a frightening future with no plan, no protections in place. It is dangerous for those who benefit from the continued devaluation of our workers, the historic oppression of vulnerable communities, and from the continued destruction of the environment. That's who would think the Green New Deal is dangerous. We want to support working families and support a safe climate future where all communities are protected. We welcome a debate on proposals for how to get there, but the science is clear as to where we need to end up. So the Republicans may think that the Green New Deal is just a resolution, but it's a revolution. It's a revolution. Young people want a green energy revolution in our country. They know we can do this. They know that all of these new technologies can be invented. All these new technologies can be deployed. It's not just a resolution, it's a revolution. And all across this country, when the Republicans refuse to bring their climate plan out here because it's a party of science denial, the president is the denier-in-chief on climate science, then we are going to allow this problem to worsen and worsen and worsen. And you know who should know best? Donald Trump. Because within 30 years, according to the science, Mar-a-Lago is going to become Mar-a-Lagoon. It's right on the coast. It's already begun to happen. It's just going to continue. Now, the president might be able to protect his property, but we're going to lose tens of trillions of dollars of the property of other Americans because he decided that he was going to deny the warning that the scientists had presented to us. When I was a boy, lying on the rug, looking at President Kennedy on the television, he challenged our country to send a mission to the moon and to return that mission safely to the United States within 10 years. When he gave that speech at Rice University, he made it very clear in the speech that we would have to invent new metal alloys that did not exist. We would have to invent new transmission systems that did not exist, that we would have to return that mission safely from the moon through heat half the intensity of the sun. We would have to complete it within 10 years, and we would have to do it, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. And that we had to be bold, because the challenge from the Soviet Union was so great. The United States did not have an option. Failure was not an option, and we completed that mission. Well, the same thing is true here for a Green New Deal. Failure is not an option. The consequences will be catastrophic for our planet and for the United States of America. And the solution is to unleash this green energy job creation engine. We now have 350,000 solar and wind workers in the United States. It's up from almost nothing in 2008. It's already happened over 10 years. We had only 1,000 megawatts of solar in our country in 2008. We now have 62,000 megawatts of solar. We only had 25,000 megawatts of wind. We now have 98,000 megawatts of wind. We only had 2,000 all-electric vehicles in our country in 2008. We now have 1 million. And between Tesla and all the other companies, they're going to sell 500,000 just this year in our country. They've invented new metals. They've invented new battery systems. They've invented new propulsion systems in order to solve those problems. But we still have a long way to go. So it's imperative that we put the tax breaks for wind and solar, for all electric vehicles, for batteries, on the books and make them permanent. Because this problem is only going to be solved if we can convince the smartest young people in our country that all the incentives, all the policies are there, and that their country has their back and wants them to solve the problem in the same way that our whole country had the back of NASA in the 1960s. If we do that, we will be successful. There is no question about it in my mind. I'm a technological optimist, and I hate the pessimism of the other side. I hate this can't-do mentality which they have, especially given what's happened in the last 10 years in electric vehicles and wind and solar, storage, technology breakthroughs. It's really sad to hear this. But I think ultimately something's rising up across this country. Young people especially, they know it's time for the revolution. They know it's time to close the door on this era where all we do is indiscriminately use the atmosphere as a sewer for all of this carbon, all of these greenhouse gases. And so I'm very confident that one way or another, this body will start to act, or it's going to become one of the top 2 or 3 election issues in 2020. Because this generation knows that the planet is running a fever. There are no emergency rooms for planets, and it's going to take action in this body in order to put the policies in place, in order to preserve this planet and hand it on better than we found it. So the challenge is great. The Green New Deal sets the framework, laying out how serious the problem is and how bold the action has to be to deal with that serious problem for our planet. And if we do it right, I think future generations will look back on ours in the same way we now look back on President Kennedy and that generation, and they will know that they discharged their historic responsibility to our country and to the planet. So, Mr. President, with that, I would like to reserve the balance of my time and to question the presence of a quorum.